Thank you all for tuning in to another exciting show of the TNeali radio show. I'm your host, Torrence Goodwin. Today's guest is very special to me, and I'm honored to have her on the show. She is the author of the book Skin, as you see, and her name is Mrs. A.P. Brooks. Thank you for coming on and welcome.
Thank you so much, Torrence, for inviting me once again.
So thanks for coming on. What I would like to do, let's start off with a brief summary of your life, your testimony. How did you get to the point or your desire to write the book Skin?
Well, Torrence, as a child, I grew up in Atlanta. I was very, very inquisitive child. And my mother fed that desire to know with books. And she brought all types of books into the home, not just the books that were for my age, Dr. Seuss and things of that nature, but she actually brought in books that talked about other cultures and encyclopedias and dictionaries. So I would find myself sometimes where kids were outside. I was inside learning words, because words to me it's artistry to me. I take words, they're three-dimensional to me. So I've always embraced words, and you couple that with a child's desire to know. And that stayed with me. I went to college for journalism, but I didn't go into that field. I went into marketing and sales. But that desire to write and to, which translated from the desire to know, it stayed with me. So when I was able to begin this book, which took 9 years of research and writing, I was passionate about it, so I stuck to it.
Wow, passion. That is the key, you all. When you want to do something, you can do anything you put your mind to it. Now, there's several things you just said a few minutes ago that got my attention. The first is being that you have a lot of children in today's era. As, they play video games, things of that nature. They're not reading as much as they should. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm guilty of that also sometimes. But when I was presented to read your book, I just couldn't put it down. When I saw the title Skin, the first thing I said was, Lord help me. I hope I can get through this. Because you got some books, when you think of the title Skin, people, they run away from it,
That's true.
But when I picked the book up, I was stunned. There was so many elements to it that it was just like reading the Bible. I just could not put it down. So with that being said, you talk about your mom, who is very vivid to a lot of us. And as you're reading your book also, Africans, Egyptians, and so on, that was part of their heritage. Education was very important to them.
Absolutely.
And so with that being stated, 9 years of research is a lot of time. How did you stay focused?
I live in a two-income household, so I still had to work, but I stepped out of corporate as a leap of faith to focus on writing the book, and so I took jobs that didn't necessarily have the level of pressure that corporate America tends to have, so that I would be free to be able to do that level of research. I did not. Within the book, there's a 13-page bibliography, but the book is only about 214 pages long. So there was a lot of research, and I did not want to refer to modern-day scholars necessarily, because I wanted the information to be unfiltered. So I handled the archive that through various chains, such as the National Library, Research Library, and the Library of Congress and things of that nature. It goes on and on and on, actually. So I handled all of that, and I wanted to be very, very respectful of the information. So what I decided to do, Torrence, is to, throughout the book, there are quotes from notable figures and people you may not have ever heard of. because I wanted the reader, as these events unfold, I wanted the reader to actually see what the people were thinking in real time, to experience what they were experiencing during those times and events. So that's really basically what what the whole journey was.
Now I want the audience to understand. Skin is not about the color of your skin, to be honest with you. It goes deeper than just that. Skin is talking about human society. Human society meaning that we all come from different walks of life, but we are the same. A lot of people don't want to hear that, but it's true. And as you read this book, and I'm not going to go completely into details, but I want you all to read it. It is a human encyclopedia / Bible. And I'll be the first one to tell you, with all due respect, skin needs to be in your universities. It needs to be in your high schools, middle school, elementary, you name it. This book is the truth. All right.
And when you mentioned Bible, Torrence, it's interesting because I am a Christian by faith, but I wanted to handle the information and historical information as neutral as possible. But you cannot talk about the whole concept of skin, how it all developed, without involving faith, religion, whether it be Christian or Islam or Judaism or Catholicism. All of those religions actually played a part in this entire journey of developing this whole concept of skin based on race based on skin color. So when you say that, I really appreciate that because it does involve all of those things. And I was happy that I was kind of, when I introduced those things, that's not commonly what scholars or academics will do. So I was a little nervous about it, but the National Library Journal has reviewed the book and they commended it as a research book for libraries all over the nation. So that was a good thing, and I've gone into universities. I've gone to Clayton State College. I've been a keynote speaker at the Woodruff Library on the campuses of Clark and Spelman and Morehouse. So, the book has found some traction, but because it's grassroots, it's taking a bit of time.
Why is it taking time, do you think? Do you think that people are afraid of the cover itself, or people just don't understand knowledge? And when I say knowledge, we all have grown up in a lot of ways that we're taught, you do this because grandma and granddad, mom and dad says this. But in your book, it is very deep. I mean, it's like, when I opened the book up and started reading, to be honest with you, I felt like I was there, but I still, if you haven't experienced it completely, you're not really going to understand.
Exactly.
So when I started reading your book, I started, not only reading your book, but I started checking into other historical facts. And I'm like, for someone that attended Liberty University, and with all due respect to Liberty, it wasn't, this book went very in depth. And I was like, I needed this book at this time. Because when I tried to pick up African American literature class or African American history courses, it got dropped. And I couldn't understand why. So I was saying to myself, what's the point of you all, offering these classes when you know that no one is going to take it? But I'll be the first one to tell you, skin needs to be in a university. It really does. Because this is a very powerful book. This is not about blacks. This is not about whites. It doesn't matter what race you are. This book is very important and key to everyone. So now I'm going to ask you, what does the color of someone's skin means? What is the concept of why is race so important? Where did it start from?
I know when I started this whole process, if I wanted to just write a book and be finished with it in 3 months, and I didn't know what topic I was going to go into. I knew it was going to have something to do with history, But if I had actually known that this was what I was going to be writing about, um, dissecting the whole idea, the whole nature of race based on that concept, I would have stayed in corporate America, to be honest with you. And that's why it took so long, because we have to, in order to deal, like today and in our society in America today, we're still dealing with this great conflict of race based on skin color. And this whole dynamic, and people are dying and still dying about this whole concept of race. And when things happen in the news, we become reactive, and justly so. We become reactive, but reaction alone is not enough. The book, actually, what it does, because I akin our racial issues to a social disease, let's say much like cancer. And I remember in the 60s, nobody talked about cancer because it was such a death sentence. And, you never talked about it. But it was only until scientists started to go back and to find the origins of different cancers do we see today that that's not such a big issue. So in the purpose of my doing this book is to go back, not to be so much reactive or reacting to things that happen on a day-to-day basis, but to go back, Torrence, and find out the origins of all of these ideas and how they began to develop as nation building, for example, in Western Europe, as nation building developed, how there's a whole notion of race. Because in actuality, for the better part of the world, people, race based on skin color, that whole concept doesn't even mean anything.
Sure.
They have no understanding or idea of that. So the whole concept itself has developed over the course of maybe a half of a millennia, in about 400 to 500 years. So you're talking about a fairly new concept when you look at the scheme, within the scheme of things of how long human beings have been on Earth. It's a fairly new concept. And so what I wanted to do was get out of this whole, the day-to-day processes and ideals that we have, that we live by on a day-to-day basis, as you said, and go back and see what happened before slavery, before colonialism. Because if you're African American and you only know your history, slavery forward, or if you're white American, you only know your history, colonialism forward, you don't know a vast amount of your history.
It's very small, especially with your Caucasian, white. If you want to talk about their history, is European, Ireland, and so on. Like you said, it's scattered. But as far as African Americans, to be honest with you, we go way back to the Garden of Eden.
We're ancient people.
And that says a lot. And the sad thing about all this is that the schools don't want to touch on that. But with all due respect to anyone that's watching this interview, I want you to understand. A lot of blacks came from around the area of the Black Sea. And I'll be the first one to tell you that if you had whites over there, I don't think they would have survived, to be honest with you. And I know that's, harsh, but I'm talking about from a skin standpoint. So I really think that we need to be honest with ourselves, blacks, whites, you name it, and let's just get to the bottom of what happened. How did we end up over here and so on. But we'll save that part for another time. What I definitely want to talk about is that blacks, as we said earlier, they was known in the beginning, especially over in Africa, Egypt, and so on, for their education. They also knew how to work with their hands and things of that nature. Can you tell us a little about that?
Okay. Again, I have to go back to the beginning of the whole process behind writing this book. I initially didn't know which way to go. Again, I didn't want to, when I took the modern day scholars and what they're saying out of the scenario, now I'm from scratch.
Right.
So I was trying to figure out how to trace this, particularly African American history back. Because I have people still today say, you can't go back and find our history. You can't do that. And DNA is doing some things. but I had to go, from a literal standpoint and literary, standpoint. And so I went back, and what I found was I ended up focusing initially on language, the science of etymology, which tells you the origin. Again, we're talking about origins, the origin of languages. So when I did that, we as Americans commonly think the Mediterranean is the birth of civilization. I started with the Mediterranean, started with those languages as early as possible, the Sumerians and the Akkadians and all of these people, and the Hebrews, the Semitic people, including some Arabic languages that were in that area, and even
Jesus spoke, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, he spoke Aramaic,
right,
and his disciples as well. But there are Arabic languages all in this whole, balled up in this whole area. And what I found through the science of etymology was that all of those languages, those early languages, actually originated out of the African family of languages. So you cannot separate people from their languages. And so that begins to be very telling without saying more.
right.
That that's very telling, because these people who spoke languages based off of African languages, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells you that it was very smart, educated, intelligent. I mean, you name it. I mean, it's just no way around it. They were the first ones, but Africans originally, they was not caught up into who was first. They was more concerned about family, which is number one, education, agriculture, things of that nature. They was just living their lives. They wasn't worried about anything else. If you want to get into the empires and stuff like that, it was all, like you said, in one big bubble.
Yeah, they were all there. And as we migrate, still today, I don't know if you're from Atlanta. I'm from Atlanta. So
shows Alabama.
Okay, so we're still migrating. So why is it too difficult for us to think that these people migrated out of Africa to find better land, better spaces? And the language itself tells you that that's exactly what they did. And then later on, they came back it spilled over into the land of Egypt, and everybody knows about the Egyptian Empire. And I know people focus on the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, but the Egyptian Empire, the dynasties within that empire lasted longer than any other empire that has ever existed.
And to this day, we all get a lot of our laws, our culture, and so on from them.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that for a minute. Egyptians, it was known for their jewelry, makeup, building pyramids, you name it. How did we get to the point of slavery? Because as you read in your Bible, it was right after Joseph, who was Jacob's son, had passed away. So being that it talks about in Exodus 1, that after Joseph died, which was a period of 400 years, they did not know the Lord. So how did we get to that point of slavery?
If you're speaking about Egyptian slavery, and going back and doing my research, Egyptian slavery was not on the same level as the Roman slavery or American slavery. They were the way that the Egyptians approached it was very different. Their slavery, their slaves were akin to family members or servants, and we know that the Roman slavery was rather barbaric, and as well as the American slavery was rather barbaric.
So you would say after the Romans, pretty much, it just carried on into American slavery.
Well, you have to understand that when nation building began in Western Europe, the only civilization that they focused on as far as their nation building a foundation within their nation was the Greek and Roman history, the Latin. And so they adopted, in fact, today you can still see the columns and all of that were Greek columns, and you can see that in the architecture, the architecture of the United Kingdom, the architecture, which translates here. All of that came out of the Greek and Roman empires. That's that influence. So they were very highly influenced. They did what I guess anyone would do. They sought out a nation or an empire that was successful. So they learned about their successes and then they duplicated them. It's just as simple as that.
So pretty much, so was slavery. So slavery was pretty much responsible for a lot of these empires being successful.
Exactly. Slavery was responsible, taking if you excuse the expression, folks' land for your own, and making making the people within that land slaves, workers without pay. It happened to the English as well. The Normans came in and took their land. They couldn't move about their own land. They couldn't own their own land without asking for their masters. So it happened. Then they were the Norman people were French-speaking people. They couldn't understand their conquerors either. They couldn't understand it. So it was like a domino effect. What, as you just pointed out, which is great, Torrence. They're learning how they're building their nations on the basis of what has happened before, but even the cruelty. But what happens is, if you notice, the Roman Empire is no longer, the Greek Empire is no longer. So there are some facets within that nation building that needed to be looked at and founded on something other than just greed, avarice, and things of that nature. But that didn't happen.
Now, for Britain to be the first to denounce slavery, why did it take Americans so long?
Well, I don't give the Brits too much credit. They did denounce slavery in the early 1800s, but the English Empire is interesting because they do their homework, basically. You really don't see the surface of what they're doing. Everything is beneath the surface. So one of the things, to me, in my opinion, their denouncing slavery was just to slow down America's progress. And secondly, they were going into Africa itself as explorers and all that. We know how that works. And they were really spying on that country's land to see, the people and whether they can conquer that land, and finding out about the resources. And we know Africa is multi-rich in resources. That's why the Western African empires lasted so long, because they were self-contained. They didn't have to get this from here or there. They were the ones that led the Sahara trade.
And they pretty much did it on their own.
Yeah, with their gold and their ivory and their diamonds and all of those things. I mean, it's just a wealth, and I do talk about that in the book more extensively, which is very important for people to know, because it was those natural resources that actually speared all of this along, and continues to this day be problematic in the country of Africa.
How did Africans end up over here? As you said a few minutes ago, that these other countries just came over to spy, to see what was going on. Was he fascinated with their culture, or did he really have intentions of actually, bringing them back over? Who is responsible for slavery ending up in America?
Well, you have America itself, and then you have the Caribbean islands, all of South America, and the land needed to be, at that time, the agriculture fed into success and profit. And you had all of these able-bodied Africans, sturdy Africans. Our diets did not, in fact, our diets basically didn't involve pig. What I wanted to say about that is, during the time of the African empires, there were a lot of religions there, pagan religions, but they they were very inviting to any idea that meant that it was for the good of the people and and the land as well, to move people forward. And they adopted the Islam faith. So most of the people that came over were Islamic, and most Africans. They came from different tribes, different cultures, different languages. But it was only until here that but they always believed in the one God. That's what I want to express. They always believed in the single creator, a single creator. So all of those ideals came over here, and then being introduced to the Christ. That was the combination of everything. And you see some of the quotes from Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, that there was a clear understanding of right and wrong, and the philosophy that Christ taught. That's what they said they embraced.
Exactly.
They just didn't embrace the slave whipping, slave carrying Christianity that the white people embraced. They saw the distinct difference, the dichotomy in those two things, which is wonderful because that's our heritage still today. What was interesting to me about this was that after the slaves were freed, you're talking about millions of people, and for the most part, they forgave the people who had enslaved them. I think that's remarkable. That's a rarity. We end up picking up arms and killing each other. But that's not to get your rights or get freedom. We do have the Civil War, but the Civil War only was pushed by the Southern people who were stubborn about slavery. And 500,000 people, mostly white, died in that war as a result of that stubbornness. So there are repercussions, historical repercussions.
And of that particular war to the Civil War, there was more people that died in that war to this day as far as history-wise, So I want people to understand that, it was a very drawn-out war. It was a process. And like you were saying, as far as the slaves, all they wanted was their freedom. They wasn't violent people. The country, the Constitution was built on being equal. But you have your founding, fathers, you talk about Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and so on. They had slaves of their own. So as you look at Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman and all them, it was like, something is wrong with this picture. How are you going to talk about, Christianity, but you're allowing this to happen? So when Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president, comes into the picture, well, people was upset. They was angry at him. That was one of the reasons why he lost his life. He was like, hey, this is not right. So being that, slavery was coming to an end, it was very touching to me, to be honest with you, that when they was on the ship coming in, they was in coffins. And we're not talking about you in your own coffin, you were stacked. And I'm thinking to myself, Noah's Ark. They was able, to have animals and so on, and people, and they able to roam around. I said, why wasn't the slaves able to do that? They were shackled down, people dying on top of you, diseases, you name it. That just had to be unbearable. And honestly, it brought me to tears, because it was cruel, very cruel. Just imagine you all being taken away from your mom, being taken away from your father, your wives, your children, never seeing them again. That's a price. That is a huge price. So
I wanted to interject something. You talked about Abraham Lincoln, but I do want the audience to know that 100 years prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, black people, both bond and free, and their white sympathizers were pushing against the institution of slavery. So in essence, which brought Lincoln to that point. In essence, he was, you'll see some of his quotes, he was a man with, that was trying to deal with some serious complexities. But all in all, he was raised a Quaker, and the Quaker tradition was to be against anti-slavery. So he had to deal with that moral ideal. You see that a lot in his writings, his moral dilemma. But he necessarily, in the very beginning, could care less whether the slaves were freed or not. But the slaves themselves, the abolitionists, if you want to say that as a whole, they pushed against the institution of slavery. Harriet Tubman and other people like her pushed against the institution of slavery. In fact, Harriet Tubman had a bounty on her head of $50,000, which today translates to $1 million. So when people say that she was not a threat, they didn't think she was a threat, that little woman, she was a threat. They had $1 million bounty on her head. So you have all of these people, people running, fleeing, and people pushing against the whole idea of the institution of slavery. It was not going to last. So the only thing that the Southerners had to hold on to, and then you find that the industrialization of the North, they're saying, okay, we don't need slaves anymore, but the South, by and large, maintained, agriculture as their main focus. So you have those two dynamics going, and I guess the South could say, well, when we started off as an agricultural country, you were okay North.
Right.
But now, you want to they felt like you want to take away our livelihood. And they weren't interested in transitioning. They didn't know how to transition. You had this whole idea of Africans being less human anyway.
Yeah.
So, and by the way,
Charles Darwin, he brought that up,
Yeah, we talked about Charles Darwin, and a lot of people, especially people who I get letters from whites, they are just, their minds are boggled by Charles Darwin, because they put him up on this huge pedestal of being somebody so great, so enormous, and so that's why it was important for me to put his quotes in, to insert Lincoln's quotes in, so that the reader could say, hey, this is not what my history books taught me, but this is what they actually thought. That's the light bulb.
I didn't know anything about Darwin until I got to college, and I was sick to my stomach, but we'll leave it at that. But as far as the South goes, and I ended on this note, you have to remember, as far as the South, when slaves came, they looked at from then, if he was bulky, skinny, or whatever, they even, they weren't concerned about the language. You look at that, North Carolina was known for rice. So if you was known for rice, okay,
in South Africa, if your region was known for rice, that's where they plucked you out of and transplanted you into the Carolinas. If your region was known for, like you said, a sturdy body, that's where they plucked you out of and translated you to Georgia, where it was the cotton picking, where you had to be sturdy, because they had actually in the very beginning of our nation, the indigent servants, they tried that out, the Irish and the Indians, but their bodies weren't sturdy enough to handle 14-hour days out there in the fields. So that tells you something about our diets. While in Africa, our diet. So we were sturdy.
And that's amazing, because I would have never thought, especially when I was reading the book, that candy yams and rice and all those things came from over there. It was until we got over here that we was left with the leftovers as far as pig feed and all of that. And for all of you that like eating pig feed, each to his own. But like you said, it just goes back to show you how healthy, we were over there. So
it's in contrast to what we've been seeing within this nation, when you have a documentary on Africa, where you see the kids with their bellies all blown up. And all of that, to me, is a byproduct of this whole development of colonialism and racism. The area that we come from had every fruit imaginable, had every vegetable, plenty of fish, which was the main meat. Yes, So, when you see that, and then you see what has happened to the country of Africa today, we still see the influences of colonialism. Even though we might say, okay, everybody's free, blah, 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 you still see the influence. As long as Africa, to be honest with you, has these wonderful, rich resources like oil, you're going to still see the influence of colonialism or white supremacy, and the only way we're going to get out of that is as people to come together and say no, no matter who they are, and educate people and push to educate people. I think this book educates people. At least that's what my feedback has been, and I thank you for your feedback. The demographics, everybody's reading it from 12 to 83 and giving comments on it, white and black, Spanish, whatever, and Asian. The book, actually, what I'm finding out, it's been out long enough, that there is a demographic of people that are not only reading the book and have the same mind-blowing experience, if I can put it that way, that you had, and it's an immediate change from being under this society that puts you in this racial divide to a sense of purpose, a sense of self-knowing, because the history in this book, what it eventually does is it puts back historical identity for African American people, which in turn puts back historical value. For white Americans, it's history that that's not necessarily well known. It tells of their humble beginnings. So to help them be more relatable to the human race as a whole.
So just like we were saying earlier, it's not really about, African Americans. It's for everyone. This book is for everyone. And what has been your perception that you have gotten as far as feedback from blacks and whites and so on? Who seems to be more interested right now at this point, and what are you doing to get this book across?
The feedback has been wonderful, and it has crossed all genres. And I'll give you briefly. There's someone emailed me. She said, "I'm white, I'm blonde, I'm slim, I'm wealthy, and I'm well educated. And I'm reading your book, but I can't get through it for the tears." So that was transformative for her, and she's using her, I think she has a blog, and she's using her blog to get the information out there. There's a young African-American boy who, his father bought the book, and he got hold of the book, and interestingly enough, he was reading the book in his downtime in his literature class. And when I saw the young man, I asked him, did he get anything out of it? And he said, "Oh man, I got a lot out of it," and that's all he said. Now, the interesting thing about this young man, I've seen him as a young child. He's always very introverted, extremely introverted, and kids picked at him because of his size and all of those kind of things. So that's all he said. He walked away, and months later, fast forward, his mom. I talked with his mom, spoke to his mom, and she said, he's ran for school president, and he's going to school wearing suits every day. So I do believe that something within that book unlocked a key within him, which I tend to see with African American men. It's unlocking a key for everyone, but for African American men, the result of it has been more sustained. I mean, it's instant. The result of it has been more instant than maybe, as a woman, we're mulling over the information, or somebody else mulling over the information because they don't have the black experience or the white experience. The impact on them is instant, and I love it. And sorry, what was the second part of that?
Well, no, you pretty much answered.
Okay.
I just want to know, honestly, what's next for this book? I mean, it's a masterpiece. I mean, I honestly feel like this book is for everybody. Let's not worry about translation and all of that. I really believe that everyone really needs to read this book, and I'm not just saying it because we're friends and things of that nature. This book is powerful.
I have an 83-year-old lady who got the book too. Her daughter bought it. And I talked to her granddaughter, and she said, my mother, she said, you wrote a book. She said, my mother's reading it. But I said, really? She's 83, in a wheelchair, and a retired teacher. And she said, whenever we're going somewhere, she said, you got my book? So I got to meet her, and she said, almost identical to what you said. She said, truly, this is a book that everybody needs to read. She said, it's just unbelievable how much information we don't know. And so I appreciate that. I appreciated that from her, and I appreciate it from you as well. And as far as where this book is going, I am currently and have been in the process of trying to get it into the schools as reading. And I think what will help that is, the academic world, and I appreciate the fact that you said that because it's a history book, you were kind of hesitant, but then when you got in there, you didn't read like your normal history book. That was the point. That was the point of Torrence to write a book that the general population can actually relate to. So it is a book that everyone, I'm trying to get it out there. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
It's on my website, www.scanbyapbrooks.com. You can Google Scan by AP Brooks and find it. So the focus now is building up this grassroots type of movement for the book, and just trying to get the information out there.
We're going to get it out there because this book will be around long after we're gone. And I mean, it's just extraordinary. I want you all to get out there, go on Amazon.com, go on Mrs. Brooks' website, purchase the book. It's not just any type of book. This is legit. Read it. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Mrs. Brooks, I just want to say thank you for coming on the TNeali radio show. I'm honored. I hope that you will come back on again.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. But thank you all once again for joining me, the TNeali radio show. I'm your host, Torrence Goodwin. You all take care and have a blessed day.